General Protocol Spaces. Banking on Freedom.
Let's get started. So, welcome to General Bull 26 of N. And we have a very special episode this time. I guess we'll call it an episode. Yeah, so we have a very particular thing to talk about. Some conversation has come up recently about infrastructure testing. What are good ways to do it? What are productive ways to do it? Is there risks? Are there benefits, costs, etc.? Yeah, so it's a very interesting topic, and we're going to get into some of the very specific details on it, and kind of debate or not debate, but just come up with try to come together with a constructive way to do testing on infrastructure and make sure that BCH keeps growing in a constructive way. So, Jeremy and you guys, Jeremy and Alex, you guys have this, mostly Alex. Alex, you're the one who has been doing some testing on mainnet, and then there was some feedback. Hey, it might be better to do that on testnet, but then there's differences. Testnet is not the same as mainnet, etc. And so that's kind of the root of the discussion that came up. And Jeremy very constructively suggested, hey, why don't we all get together and use a Twitter space or podcast or whatever to discuss it and try to come up with something useful for everybody, not just for this particular topic. So, Alex, I was thinking, could you start with telling us what it is that you're kind of looking to do with the testing that you've been doing, and then we can use that to roll into ideas about how things could be done.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has actually been in the back of my mind for a while, and I have discussed some of these ideas with a few different developers in the BCH community. But let me do just a very high level of the couple different things I've been looking to, I guess, to test or to research. And then very limited to why, but there's like five different things or 4 different things I was looking for here. So one of the first things I was thinking is people for a long time saying, what's going on? Like a bunch of nodes, even if there's a bunch of transactions in the mempool, a lot of nodes still seem to have a soft cap. So it's like, all right, it should be pretty easy to document which mining pools currently have what soft cap. Put a bunch of 1 sat per byte transactions and see what the max size is that these nodes will do. And then also see if you change that min 1 sat per byte to 2 sats per byte, 3 sats per byte, how might that change? And I've already found a couple things in this. For instance, NiceHash seems to be one of the only ones that does up to 32 megabytes today, whereas a couple others might be soft capped to 1 megabyte, 3 megabytes, 8 megabytes, and I think 16 as well. That one I have not seen in recent testing, but I need to something I was going to look at, and also to see if having a large op return might change any of that. As well as so what's the main on testnet? I know we've done 256 on ScaleNet. I think we've done like 512 or gigabyte blocks even in testing. And so that's never really been a concern. I know the tech is there, but then when you look, the mainnet is now you have actual real economic drivers here, and you're not in a perfect ideal scenario. You're dealing with now, all right, these are real economic actors that have a control over their own nodes and can set whatever parameters they want. It also depends on whatever connection to the network and otherwise. So what's a realistic what's the bottleneck right now for either a burst of transactions or perhaps sustained transactions per second on the mainnet? Right before you get into broadcast failures, and there's a bunch of different variables which can lead into that, which is something that I'm also trying to figure out is how does that work? Are there certain limits when you're just doing a bunch of chained zero conf transactions, or does if you spread a bunch of across a bunch of different addresses, does that TPS number actually go up without any mempool conflicts or any broadcast issues? And then all this, okay, well, maybe the default note, some of the default node settings, maybe it makes sense in 2024 that at some point some of these defaults maybe change. And then lastly is like, for instance, anytime we go over about a megabyte or two in the mempool, it seems that almost all except for one or two mempool visualizers that I found seem to break down. And so, and that last part, I'm in communication with a couple different developers that host their own mempool visualizers, including Tax City, and they just launched the Flip Starter this morning or last night. Just 3 BCH just to add cache tokens, add a few more things, and beef up the infrastructure. But yeah, so those are the kind of the main things going. And then the last thing would be really fun to see Abla actually activate a little bit in practice at some point. Not to say that part actually has to happen on mainnet. That's really the least of my concerns. But all the other things above, I know is kind of maybe a little bit broad, but those are the things that I've been looking at.
Okay, that's great. Let me make sure I got that. So there were about 5 things. I'm not sure, but let me know if I got this roughly right. So there was transactions in the mempool and the soft cap on mempool transactions, or a configured cap on mempool transactions. That's one thing that you wanted to check. Second one was something about large opereturns and their effect. I'm not sure exactly what you meant, but something about opereturns and their effect on the. I'm not sure what exactly, but something about
what a node would accept. For instance, maybe the opereturn one is kind of just a very sub branch, but of that same idea. If there's any limits that some miners have on opereturns, yeah.
Large. I mean, the opereturns have a fixed size. What does it mean? A large opereturn?
So no, I mean, so like I think in the node software you can actually I had to double check this. This is why it's just on sub branch of my list. But I think you can cap what is the max opereturn size you would allow in your block, and to see if there's any prominent miners that have limited it below what our consensus number is.
No, okay, all right. Okay, so that was the second one. The third one is checking for various types of failures due to bursts of transactions, which is totally realistic scenario. And then fourth is the same thing, but for sustained transaction volume. And then looking for mempool conflicts, broadcast issues, that kind of thing. And the fifth one was to see ABLA. ABLA, for the listeners, is the adaptive block size limit algorithm. So this is the one that that's coming up in May, and will let Bitcoin Cash have adaptive block cap, so that as usage grows, the maximum size of blocks can increase and so forth. It's adaptive, and you would like to see that tested, right? More or less, you'd like to see that.
I would maybe ignore that last one somewhat.
Okay.
I don't think that one's really. I don't think that one's really an issue, considering pretty easy to know whether Abla works on testnet and it'll work on mainnet. But I guess the only reason you would test on mainnet, though it would get very expensive, is to see, okay, who's changed their soft caps because of this. Right.
Okay. All right. Okay. So those 5 things. Okay. I think we're basically on the same page, right? Then, so and there was some feedback, right?
Yep.
So I jumped in, and maybe somebody else did, and I was like, "Hey, please don't do that on mainnet." Right? Was the summary of what I said, like, do it on testnet, and you're like, wait, no, that's not the same to do on testnet, right? Totally valid things. So I think there's a good space for us here to talk about what are the risks and benefits of doing these things, these particular tests and investigations on mainnet, and I want to start out to make sure that we don't end up in an unnecessary conflict. That I think doing these kind of things on mainnet, I don't think there's a problem per se with it. And of course, two things. One, of course, anyone can do whatever they want. There's nobody that can stop them. But this discussion, I think, is in the vein of we want to do the best thing possible as opposed to just anything that is possible, right? I think we can all agree on that. Is that a fair
Absolutely.
statement? Yeah. And so then the second point I wanted to say is that doing it on mainnet is not bad per se, from my perspective. It's that there's a better approach where you can get most of the testing done on testnet, and you can do it in a way that doesn't trigger the risks and costs of doing it first on mainnet. And it takes a lot more work, but in my opinion, that's the best way to do it. So this is a gray discussion on what's the best way or better way to do things. So let me ask before I go on into kind of exploring this, Jeremy. Did you hear anything that did that sound like the right framing for everything? Do you see anything missing here at the beginning of the discussion?
Yeah. I mean, I think my perspective on it is like we can just see generally, and this is a bit unrelated, but we can see generally in the overall crypto space as BCH is getting more in the narrative and people are discussing it more and more and more. One thing that keeps coming up over and over and over again is the small blockers say, oh, your nodes are all going to die basically if you have bigger blocks. And then the BCH people say, no, they won't, it'll be fine. And then the BSV, like everybody just has an opinion, but the actual amount of data and research is fairly low. Like the BCH community has done some, but it's quite scattered around and it's hard to find. So One thing I want to do is just collect a lot of that in one place, and then, or at least the links, or so that we have some sort of archive of what's actually going. And then the second thing is to not only be able to demonstrate that research, but also have, as the community grows, people are going to have questions or things that they want to do, like Alex, as to, well, what if I'm going to launch my big app, or whatever the case may be. And those people, if they come in, especially if they're not that familiar with the community, they don't have any connections or they don't know anything, and they just like start doing it, and then suddenly everybody panics, then they'll be like, what's going on? I thought the whole point was to build sensible defaults. Like, I'm just building an app, or I'm just making transactions. What's the problem? Why is that an issue? So if that's going to be the case, then they're going to need if somebody's going to object, they can't just say that's bad, stop. They need to say, look, here's a better way to do it, and here is specific steps on how to go about this, and the reasoning and so forth, so that at least there's a beginning point rather than just like confusion. So I think that's two reasons that we really want to have solid documentation of our sort of scaling approach and how to do things. And maybe that hasn't been that necessary in the past because there's been other battles to fight in the community, but we're kind of getting to the point where the interest in this kind of stuff is rising, and potentially we will actually need to be ready to follow through on the promises that we all say that we have with big blocks. So let's take that seriously.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's a super good thing. Just a second, Unim. I wanted to add, I actually heard three things from what you said that I think I put on a to-do list here, like action items in corporate speak. There's collect the research, very valid. Of course, BCR does that, but we're talking specifically, right, about research and doing experiments, more or less, right, like empirical experiments. So that's one thing to be done.
The scaling stuff.
Okay, yeah, especially about scaling. Yeah, for sure. It's definitely the biggest monster to be tamed. So, but then the second one that you didn't mention explicitly, but I think is totally in that message that you were saying, is just getting better at doing, at arranging and executing research, becoming more scientific and convincing about the way that BCH ecosystem does research. That's a totally, in the loop kind of point that's going to happen. And then the last one that you made is presenting a constructive model for how to do that research, so that people can come in and be like, oh, okay, that's what I should do. That's great. There's already a kind of guidelines and activity going on that I can fit into or ape and do a similar thing. Those are great points. Sorry, Yuning.
Yeah, I just want to provide some context. In case people run into this run into different sides of the argument later without knowing this. I think there are some important things to know before going in. So first thing is that there are some things we know. Like, for example, we know for a fact that every single node and every single node that's at least those that synchronize from scratch, at least, and every indexer and app that synchronize from scratch on the network right now is capable of handling 32 meg blocks. We know that for a fact. And the reason, and we not only know that they can handle 32 meg blocks, we know that they can also handle it for some sustained length. The reason I say that is not because of any sort of hubris, or the reason I say that is not because of any sort of hubris or unwarranted optimism. The reason I say that is because literally every single one of them have to go through a period of blocks in the BCH history where this has happened. Every single one of them has to cross that line, and if they don't cross that line, they fail to sync. They fail to sync. They fall off the network. That's a thing that several applications, including the some of the no longer relevant SLP indexers have to cross. It's like a veil, and that period was back in 2018. 2018, where I believe there was several days, and there were several days of a massive we will call stress test, or some would call it spam wave that nChain has put on the network, and they even supplied their own hash power to mine many 32 meg blocks in a row. And if you sync on the network today, you will see that very significant and very noticeable bump when your synchronization progress is delayed. So everybody has to cross that. So that part I would say is a bare minimum that people will have to cross. So if they made it through that line, you know that they are quote unquote capable of handling that. With that said, just because you can cross that line without going up in fire, without being on fire and dying and screaming for help, does not mean that your setup can is capable or in a good condition to handle longer sustained I should say waves of these conditions today or for a longer sustained amount of time. And that is because even if you technically can handle, quote unquote, handle that for some time, it doesn't mean that you have provisioned enough stuff to just keep it going for longer and longer and longer indefinitely. That has cost, and people might or might not be willing to pay that cost for that infrastructure. So that is why we have seen later, there was at least one other attempt at stress testing. I don't remember, it was 2019 or 2020, but that one is not miner back. That one was some kind of community initiated, And there were some inconveniences, but people made it fine. Some people were annoyed, some people were not. It's debatable whether people learn much, but yeah. So with some mixed results. So that was the context that I would like to provide. So if part of the goal was to ask the question, okay, will the nodes make it through some short amount of time where some 32 meg blocks were or smaller were, or a big mempool was thrown at them? The answer is yes, they will. But other questions might have more mixed results. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, I'd say these all fall under the kind of costs umbrella, right? The risks and costs umbrella, which I'd like to put into the larger context a bit in a moment. That's exactly how I would like to start the conversation, because everything, right, has costs. Everything has trade-offs, costs and benefits. And so since we're looking for the best or the better way to do things, or a better way to do things, yeah, it's going to be good to bring up the costs, and then we'll also bring up the benefits and look at those and see if we can find some ways that we could easily here together say, yeah, this looks like the kind of right way to do things according to our current understanding. Before we get into it, though, Jonathan, did you have anything to add before we get into a further discussion?
I have some specific notes on like the things we talked about in the very beginning, but you can set up framing first, and I'll circle back to it later.
Okay, yeah. So the frame that I would like to have here, this is how I would like to approach it, but you guys let me know what you think. So we can probably agree that doing everything on testnet is silly. That doesn't give you. There's a lot of things that you can't check on testnet. So that's a question to ask. What can you not check on testnet? And then, so actually, let me take it one step back. If we could hypothetically say, hey, look, all the things you want to learn, you can learn on testnet. If you could literally learn everything, could we agree, in this hypothetical world, that would be the obvious thing to do? Do all the testing on testnet. Is that, Alex, is that a fair thing to say if in that hypothetical world it were true?
Yes, because if testnet and mainnet were basically identical, then yeah, I mean, there would be no purpose in doing it on the mainnet. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and it would be like
I'm going to say no.
Right.
I think it's the other way around. I would only agree with that if everybody in the world was also convinced that was true, because there's a certain element to this where we can talk the talk, but you got to walk the walk, right? So something I'm trying to get out of this is that when everybody says, oh yeah, big blocks, like we need to have a convincing case that this can work in practice. And like, if we're just saying, yeah, okay, it's on testnet, we've tested it, like everybody can say, yeah, my rocket's gonna, get to the moon, until you actually have to send it there, right? So I think that also plays into this.
Absolutely. I mean, that's like on the benefits side, right? Where, yeah. In this hypothetical imaginary world, everybody understands that testnet is equal to mainnet, whatever. Yeah, but that doesn't exist, of course. So yeah, there's benefits to doing things on mainnet where you can say, look, it's real and it really does the thing. Of course, the absolute best is when all of that is real economic activity and everybody says, okay, yeah. But a second best, I think it's easy to say, is, okay, so there was experimentation done that shows that it reasonably should work, right? We've done the experiments that, represent something close to real world activity that's predicted, and it's a meaningful experiment. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, then, all right. So if a lot of things could be done on testnet, that would be great, because there are costs. So there's the cost that Uname listed up, and then there's the benefits. That's the other part of the frame, right? There's the benefits to it, which is maybe Jeremy, you want to list up more of those? What are the benefits of doing it on Mainchain? So there's what I call hype marketing, which is where it's like, we can do gigamegs or whatever, which Yeah, that has a bit of a poisoned
Well, to be
approach. There's honest marketing, right? Which is like, we've done these experiments and it's very cut and dry, and here, read the research paper, which, you know, has its own value, but it's not marketing per se. What are the other kind of benefits? Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, just one clarification on the hype marketing. I don't know. I mean, that's more deceptive marketing when you're talking about that.
I was going to say that, but yeah.
If Electrum goes offline for 3 weeks and your biggest apps also go offline for 2 to 3 weeks, that's not really showing that the network works. That's kind of showing, oh, hey, it doesn't actually scale this well yet, so things need to be improved. So I wouldn't. I more classify that as deceptive marketing.
Sure.
Just wanted to clarify that part.
Yeah, I was trying to put them in extremes because, like, the purely honest, like, clinical marketing is also on a bad extreme, right? Where it's like, okay, you've presented a research paper and nobody's going to read it and nobody cares, right? So there's something in between the extremes of hype and dry research to show that things work. Yeah. So yeah, Jeremy or anybody really, like, what are the benefits of doing things on main chain?
Well, I can think of definitely. So we call it hype marketing. I think we should actually call it, maybe credibility marketing. That's what I would say is. It's the same thing. Like, you could say the same thing, right? But there's a big difference between gigamegs and, like, look, here's the report. We did this properly. Yeah. We discussed it. It's all well presented. Here's the doc we put somewhere credible with the rest of our other credible research and information, So I would say credibility and marketing is a big part of it. I would say that sort of is in two factors. So one is external, when people say, is this going to work? That's true. But also internally, I think there can be quite a lot to be said for the BCH community themselves, because, yeah, we can say, okay, big blocks and on paper, like, this is all checked out, but it would be nice, and I'm sure it would be beneficial if everyone was like, yeah, it's going to work, and then another thing is the opportunity for the rest of the ecosystem, especially the technical stuff. So, wallets, block explorers, visualizers, or whatever else you have, if they get a heads up and they know this is coming, that's also an opportunity for them to make sure their systems are not going to fall apart. Now, in an ideal world, obviously a lot of them, well, I guess it would depend on the service, may or may not be directly impacted. Like, they might have a layer in between. So for them, it's going to be more a case of, well, if the layer below us doesn't go down, we'll be fine. But you never know in practice, and that's and it would depend on a service to service basis as well there too. So I think that's another important element to it.
That's a great one. Like, working up to the fidelity problem, right? Instead of being like, well, one day, for anybody who doesn't know, the fidelity problem is a very old proposal or idea in Bitcoin that, one day a huge use case will suddenly appear and then everything skyrockets, right? Like, usage, transaction volume, value, etc., skyrockets. So, working up to the fidelity problem instead of just being like, well, we think it's going to work, right? Yeah, and doing that in a controlled, sustainable way to get there. Where, that's a great benefit. Credibility marketing. That's a great name. I'm going to use that from now on. Alex, did you have others that you think of as the benefits for doing this? Of course, the obvious one is you know what the real limits are, which is that credible marketing. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a little more than just the marketing side of the marketing. I think that's one of the big ones. I love how Jeremy broke it down to external, internals. Like, externals, like, will this actually work? And internals, like, oh, now we actually know.
Yeah, we're confident.
This does work. We're not just saying it works because we think it does. We're saying it works because we deep down really know, because we witnessed it work. But the other part is just, again, it's not just the marketing. It's like, okay, and this is why coordinated things would be even better, as much as is possible in a decentralized network, is just giving people the ability to really test these things. And yeah, I know testnet can do some of that, but not everyone's going to be on testnet, and good luck convincing any of the miners to do anything. So there's also the benefit of, doing some research that maybe not everyone's on board with. They're like, okay, and you don't want to overdo it, obviously, because that's another negative. It's like, oh, then maybe it's not worth it to support this anymore. You don't want that. But at the same time, he's like, oh, okay, so maybe this is the economic group that they haven't broken, but maybe they have limits that should be raised, and now we know who that is. And it's just beneficial to have that extra knowledge you wouldn't otherwise.
Awesome. Okay, so I think this is a pretty good frame. We've got kind of a list of costs and benefits. Costs, permanent hit to sync costs. It breaks some part of the ecosystem if they're not ready, which that has various issues. But just as a general issue, it breaks some things that are in production, right? It increases costs for all infrastructure operators whenever these kind of stress tests or pushes and then pushing the boundaries happen. The learning. So I added this to the list. So I said the learning is not maximized, and what I mean is when you do things with no well, I guess we could say you're learning different things. If you do things as a surprise, so to speak, you're learning something different than you would learn if you did it in a coordinated way. So it's not really a cost. It's just a difference. And then on the benefit side, there's external, credible marketing, and internal, I wrote down grounded confidence, right? Like Alex and Jeremy, you were saying, you know what you're saying you can do, and you're actually confident that you can do it. And also, as Jeremy said, there's an opportunity to grow your capabilities in a controlled way. Okay, great. So does anybody want to take a shot at kind of drawing a little line here where we say, not in every case, but as a kind of general rule, as a general approach, where would you kind of draw a line here on these are the things that would be ideal if you could do ahead of time, and the things that would be good to
before we go there, John?
Yeah,
I want to go through my notes because I think we have a framing and we've looked over things pretty clearly. So I'm gonna go back to like the original motivations that were described and say that some of the things that were presented there, they simply can't be done on a testnet. You can't know what the existing miner soft caps are, what policy parameters they have if you look on testnet, because that's not where their hardware is configured to work. And you can't convincingly demonstrate like real life capability to external users who doesn't trust testnet validation that we actually can do this, but we can for everyone else. And there is another point that wasn't mentioned, but just for the sake of completeness, I'm gonna say that you also can't do like indirect market manipulation by disguising as economic activity in order to drive up price. I don't condone doing that, but that is also something that you can't do on testnet because no one cares about the testnet numbers, so they won't trade on them. But there are also some things that you actually can do on the testnet in terms of this, and that is the burst and sustained test outcome measurement. Of course, if you're looking at only like specific indexers or at like specific mempool visualizations, then if they're not on testnet, you can't do that on testnet either. But for the sake of the network itself, you actually can do those tests on testnet. The testnet we have might not be ideal for it though, and there might be a better testnet configuration that you can use in order to do this. And if you talk with the Bitcoin Unlimited guys about the GigaBlock testnet initiative, you will learn that they spun up multiple different nodes in multiple different geographic parts of the world in order to simulate real-world latencies and real-world network conditions, as well as configured the nodes slightly different so they weren't all the same and so on. And then they set up and did something in a controlled manner. And for the burst and sustain test, I actually think that is a better way to do it. At least do it once in that way before doing it on mainnet. I know you could argue that, yes, GigaBlock testing has already happened, so we have already done it, but it's kind of outdated, right? It's 8-something years old. It would be good to have a similar test being done again on on that kind of setup.
It's also specifically done with nodes and nothing else. While when we talk about network resilience, it's usually about the applications on top of that. That is a common pitfall when people talk about this.
So let's talk about the things that actually broke, the things that we recently in this testing got to see. You said that mempool visualizers had problems, like every single one of them had a problem when the stress test happened.
There's one that didn't. The one that didn't was buyhuddlecell.com. They do BTC.
Interesting.
Right,
so
it actually
one
works
may be
very
true.
well.
That's great. I suspect the other ones might, improve and get better over time, and they'll also make it through in the future. But I want to tie this point back to what Jeremy said, that like, if you can communicate and tell them, give them a heads up, then it's an excellent opportunity for them to be there when it happens, figure out what needs improvement, and get the work done. But if you don't communicate with them, or if you can't communicate with them, for example, how many Chinese or Spanish websites or mempool explorers, whatever, are there out there? I don't know. How many of their infrastructure was impacted? I don't know. So there's a distinction to draw there. It's like, and more fundamental questions that might be worth asking is, did they want to test if their infrastructure can handle it? Because if the answer to that question is yes, then there are obvious better ways for them to test it, right? They can very quickly hook it up to a testnet and run the load on that testnet. They don't need to run it on mainnet in order to verify themselves. But if we want to validate that they can handle it, right? If we go in for the untrusted aspect and say, I want to know if you, service provider over there, is actually capable of handling 32 megabyte blocks consistently, then, well, you could ask them. You could see if they were willing to set up, or you could contribute resources and help them set up a testnet, run their software at 32 megabytes load, and get a number. Or you could maybe not even trust that model and do it on mainnet. But these are all very different things. And so knowing what cost and trade-offs there are is something that I think is important in this discussion.
Yeah, you said it very well. And I was going to add that. I had a kind of vague idea, but yeah, what you said brings it out very well, is that all of this, let's say before things are done on mainnet, before anything gets broken. So let's say, it's actually an opportunity to increase communication with stakeholders. Because like you were saying, Alex, right? Like miners, which ones care, which ones actually give a shit and are paying attention to what's going on and so forth, right? There's very little cross-pollination, interaction, communication going on there, right? Between the larger BCH ecosystem and the mining pools and the miners. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to look at it. It's an opportunity to be like, hey, we have a specific thing to talk about. Let's have a talk about it. It's an opportunity. It's expensive to do that. And that's also worth noting, right? That all these things that are like, hey, these are great ideas, also have a cost. But as Jonathan said, it's a cost to you, as in you, the person who wants to do an experiment. It's a cost to you as opposed to a socialized cost that you're throwing out onto the network. So yeah, there's some kind of balance to be struck there as well.
If I just maybe getting ahead of myself here a little bit, but would it make sense that, for instance, have one day a year, it's all pre-announced, that we're going to be doing, and maybe it doesn't at all, or maybe it's some sub-segment or some piece of this that maybe does, right? Some huge manipulation of this, but to have a specific day, right, where it's pre-announced, pre-planned, like, hey, on this day, 2 months from now, or whatever, we're going to be running these tests on mainnet, and we'd like to coordinate with as many people as possible, give as much heads up as possible, because this is what we want to do. This is what we're trying to figure out, and we want to make sure everyone is ready.
Absolutely.
Right, so
I think no question about it. I just want to say, sorry, Jonathan. I just want to say first, yeah, great, excellent idea. The only thing I would say is, like everything with engineering, you start small. You start very small and you iterate.
So I just want to provide another bit of context, is that historically miners actively hate this and will work against it, and you might
Yes,
have
yes.
noticed this recently. Like and they do a, you know, depending on what your goal is, they do a fairly good job of this. In that, you know, they will actively try to find which transactions are you putting up en masse on the blockchain, and then they will filter those out and ignore it sometimes for days, and you know, just take in the transactions that look kind of normal and just mine those. So you may sometimes see like 50k, you know, it's not zero, it's 50 kb blocks, and people are like, wait, there's a stress test going on. What stress test? You know, my deposits are working just fine. So you may see that. So historical, maybe people can do a better job or something, but historically they don't give a damn, and they will actively work against this. So,
Well,
Yeah, let me jump in
just sorry, yeah, John, go. Sorry.
Right. So this brings us to maybe the underlying question that actually needs to be answered in this context. And that is, what are the miners working for? So the miners benefit when the coin and the overall health of the network goes up. And so it is in the miners' interest to make sure that we have as much as possible of meaningful economic activity. Meanwhile, a stress test is not necessarily to be considered meaningful economic activity. And the cost of doing a stress test happens on all the actors in the ecosystem. Miners is one of those actors. Now, all of these people who are paying the cost to keep the network operational, the people who run indexers, the people who run nodes, the people who run payment processor, the people who run wallets, the people who run a lot of different things, they all do it because they have an incentive, right? They have a reason to do what they do. And I would say with 99% certainty that it's all tied to relevant economic activity. And so if you scale up the usage of the network and put a big load on it, and the cost goes up for all these actors, as long as that load ends up being relevant economic activity, I believe that most of those actors will happily eat that cost because they benefited from it in the first place, so they should benefit more from it when you have more of it. But when you're doing a stress test and you're putting mainnet transactions on that doesn't carry that economic activity, then it doesn't translate into more sales for the payment processor, more fees for the BCH pool, and so on. What happens is that you instead propagate cost. And while the person transmitting the transaction and generating them might consider that cost to be acceptable for themselves, it's very difficult to know if the rest of the network is going to be okay with that cost. So as a final note here, one of the things you wanted to learn is, what are the actual soft cap of the miners that we have today? And so I'm going to give you a counter question. Why do they have the soft caps they have today, right? Could it be because we have done stress tests in the past? Could it be because they don't like certain types of activity and they just limit the mempool as a functional response? It's possible. I don't know. I'm not a miner.
And
Or
then
they're just very old configurations that they just haven't bothered to change because they haven't had a reason to. And not to say that stress testing will make them have reason to. It most likely won't. But in a lot of these cases, I don't think any of us know. Though, if someone does, I would love to hear it. These are probably just very old soft limits that have been left in over time because we've only changed the cap. We've not changed, what the defaults are necessarily, or that they're going to change their. Everyone has their config file, right? That they already specified what they wanted in 2017.
in some areas, maybe yes, but in others, as Uname was saying, miners are and pool operators are extremely savvy when it comes to winning blocks. They know what it takes and what's going to cost them, milliseconds on winning a block. And so I don't think you can know without asking which ones of those things are just accidents and which ones are intentional. And that's why I think it's a great point, as one of us brought up earlier, that it's an opportunity for communication, to just ask. Hey, we did these testnet things, and it looks like things are soft capped here. And then what do you have? Why is that? Do you have a reason for that? Or is it just the default? Or, it's a great opportunity to increase those connections and with the wider
quick
ecosystem.
Question about those soft caps and settings back from 2017. When we switched away from using Bitcoin ABC as the client that miners en masse use to a different client, would that not have resulted in them actually updating what their defaults are?
No, because if you put it, so there are two things. So one is the default, and that is if you don't set anything, what would be the default soft cap that the node software sets for you? That currently stands at 16 megs, by the way. So if you see a 16 max somewhere, 16 max block somewhere, there is a fairly good chance that that guy might just be following the default, and that is important. But on the other hand, if you have some custom setting from your configuration file, that is not going to be changed when you switch over or upgrade through versions. That is always respected. So yeah.
Right.
There's a further
configuration files, they don't self-populate from the defaults, right? There's a manual action to put data inside of those configuration files.
If they did.
If they did, if there's nothing in that configuration, then the node, when you upgrade the node, the node team could put in different default that will propagate.
So,
but if you have something in the configuration, then that will stay.
And most probably savvy node miners, or any miner is going to have at least some customizations to their node software. They're gonna have a config file.
That's right. But which parts are accidental or default, and which parts are intentional? And there's even a third level, which is pools run modified versions of nodes, right? If the network is important to them, they're probably, in many cases, for the very big pools, running modified nodes where they have made custom patches to the nodes to make them behave in certain ways or achieve optimization, especially. So, yeah, there's several levels of it. And where does any particular boundary fall? Shit. It's hard to know if you don't ask.
Yeah,
well, I can tell you today, NiceHash does 32 megabyte blocks. I think they're the only one because I've seen them do it.
Okay, cool.
So the question that I was looking at though is the ones that have a soft cap. So we can say that everyone that doesn't have 16 today, they have configured their config file. Why did they configure it? And in the future, what actions could we possibly take that would make them want to configure it and not trust the node developers on what a good default value is? To me, if there is a ton of non-economical transactions on the network that doesn't raise like the value of the coin and their reward, then chances are that they are going to say like, yeah, but let's put some caps here until real world growth happens.
Yeah, you can't assume that a decision is accidental or intentional, really, until you just ask. It could be both ways.
Yeah, and I also want to caution against lumping in miners as an entire entity over while of course I also understand that it is convenient to say so, and that's why we say it. But different miners often have very different pools. I would say different pools often have very different behaviors that presumably is shaped by their own unique circumstances. Like, for example, on the one end of the spectrum, we know that via BTC is usually quite active in adjusting to context, and we have seen that several times. Like, if you give them a burst, often you will see, wow, 5BTC is at 4 mag, and then after a while, wow, it's up, it's trying to clean up, it's at 16 megs, and then you will see some further things like sophisticated filters on them, and then you would also see a slightly different behavior at BTC.com, for example. And BTC.com usually, historically, as I observe, is a bit more aggressive in cleaning up and having bigger block sizes. And having less restrictive filters. While on the other hand, there are some pools like pro hashing, which is extremely aggressive in trying to mine small blocks. Like they are also usually the first in line in terms of pulling really weird shenanigans like timestamp warps and other kinds of weird things. So different pools have very different settings, and then there is also the fact that they can impersonate each other without too much effort. So these are all things to keep in mind when talking about them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole world, right? If you even dip your toes into the whole mining and
In the
pool
whole zoo.
world, it's a whole different industry and world that just has its own language and philosophy and whatnot, and it's varied there as it is in anywhere else. Society's a fractal, right? Okay, so let's try to make some progress. I would like to take all that stuff that we said, and I went ahead of time and made up a list of like a kind of best practices, and I'd like to present that and see, does that sound reasonable, or is there some way to improve it and so forth, make it more specific? So let me present that real quickly. Is that all right?
Can I just interject one quick question?
Sure.
Because I'm actually curious. Why is the default 16 megs and not 32?
It has historically for most of BCH's life been 2 megs. Just for context, it has been up several times since then. I think it was up to 8 megs in 2020, and it was further up to 16. I think for this cycle with ABLA at version 27. The rationale for a smaller soft cap than the hard cap is actually kind of cute. This was not mentioned in too many places, but usually comes up whenever this usually only comes up when this kind of discussion was around. Is that if you put it squarely at 32 megs, then from what we have observed, miners would just aggressively set it lower anyway. And basically, if you don't give them something that they like, you can expect them to diverge significantly from it, and you end up with a net result that might be even worse than if you give them something that's mildly acceptable in the first place. So you have at 16 meg is probably pushing it a bit, but we can probably still see some net benefits to it. But I don't think I think from what we have observed, generally, if you put it at 32 megs, it might not be very beneficial to the overall general throughput.
I
Follow-up
think it.
question.
Oh wait, Jonathan, just a
Uh,
second before you add a question. Just to follow up on a kind of wrap up of that, I think this is very well wrapped up in the concept of don't break user space, right? Which very famously came from Linus Torvalds and maybe somebody else before him. But don't break user space, and for the miners and so forth, this is kind of in line with that, right? Like don't do something that you think might break user space for them, for the pools and miners. This is a reasonable place to be conservative with changing defaults.
Right. So my follow-up question: what are the odds that we manage to remove the soft cap, like at or relatively soon after the Abla upgrade?
Oh, you mean in order to influence the hard cap, or for some other reason?
The Abla upgrade is informed by the block sizes that comes out,
Yes.
and by having something as a soft cap in the first place, you're kind of dictating what information it's able to learn. And so, from my perspective, before Abla, I can imagine that we bumped up the hard cap significantly, but the soft cap slowly grew after. It's kind of like an approximation of what Abla is supposed to do going forward, right? To grow with demand. And so I'm thinking after Abla has happened, it's probably a good time to start looking into not having soft cap and consider Abla to be the cap, right? To be the way that we regulate these things.
Well, I mean, I mean the thing about removing it, or setting it to 32 is the aforementioned problem. Like, if you don't set something that you think a reasonable number of miners would like, when they take it into their own hands, you might not like the outcome. Maybe that outcome is okay. Maybe that outcome is okay. Maybe that outcome being smaller is okay. But it depends on really what you're
I
trying
think
to
it's
aim for.
perfectly fine for the miners to set their own policy limits. No problem. Their hardware, their choice. But the default software that they are using, with Abla in there, it feels weird to me to also have a soft cap that isn't set to Abla, because that diminishes the value that Abla has. So if they manually configure something else, that's fine. But I think the default should actually be removed to be set to the same whatever Abla says.
The thing about all defaults is that because it's one line in configuration, this is all paper thin anyway. So it is important to know that further that a lot of this further tweaking, like we can set it to 32 meg today, and chances are maybe the impact would be minimal. Yeah.
I just don't see how there's going to be any. I don't expect there to be any brand new mining pool that comes out of nowhere with any significant amount of hash, right? And people already have their soft caps, so having a default where you don't have now this lower soft cap when we have Abla, I agree. I mean, I think I agree with Jonathan here. Is like it doesn't. It's not. I don't think it's sensible to even have a cap, right? Because then now, otherwise, someone has to manually remove the cap.
Yeah, well, my point is that the software has been there like since forever. People are generally okay with it, and we know that a good number, if not the majority, of the hash power is set their own software anyway. So if we remove that today, well, maybe it looks nicer, but what would actually be the benefit?
So wait. I want to present a more constructive.
Signaling would be one of the benefits.
Hold on. I want to present I want to present a specific issue here. So there is a cost to this. It's not free. And that is expectations and communication and reputation. These are social layer issues, and they are very real. And there's an additional problem where BSV has poisoned the well on large blocks. You have to be very careful not to be lumped in, because still in many places where people don't pay attention to BCH, which happens a lot in mining pools and whatever, right? They're in their own world. They still lump in BCH with BSV. Like they have this mindset. You have to understand that they don't see things the same way we do. And if they get a whiff, just a little whiff of, wait, you're doing unlimited blocks? Oh yeah, fuck this noise. We're out, right? And there can be a mental cutoff, an emotional mental cutoff there, or an economic cutoff. So you have to be very careful. Your reputation is important. Your reputation comes from how you act, how you set expectations, and how you communicate. When you want to make a change like this to something that's been there, as Uname said, forever, sure, maybe ideally it makes sense to just, remove it and like whatever. You guys have your own settings. But at the same time, that can easily come at a cost of, hold up, what's going on here? Is this BSV now? And you absolutely do not want to enter that space where you get mentally lumped in with BSV. So yeah, doing this in a conservative way to say, yeah, things are going to change, maybe eventually going to remove. It's the soft cap is removed, but look, we actually have ABLA now. And actually, there is an adaptive cap that you can trust, and this is how it works, and so forth. Like that's a conversation to be had, and it's not a good idea to assume that everybody will see things the same way we do.
I mean, I could be off base here, but if someone notices the default changing, chances are they're tuned in enough that they know that there's the network upgrade with ABLA. And what that
Well,
is.
not necessarily.
No.
Because they might not notice for a while, and then when they do notice, they feel rugged because they're like, what? I didn't know about this. Where did this suddenly come from? Like what Emergent is saying is really, really important, that, okay, maybe we have an idea for an ideal thing, but you don't just do it and then afterwards be like, okay, deal with it, everybody. Instead, you got to, it's the exact same as the chip process, or even having this space, right? Is at first you have an idea. It's actually a fantastic idea, but people don't like change. So there's 10 million objections and 9 million of them are stupid, but they're the initial objection. So you've got to work people through it, and everybody gets time to swirl it around in their own mind, talk to all their mates, and yeah, it'll probably be fine. And then you get there, right? So if we want to change things, and I think we do, and I think we can, then you got to do it step by step, and you got to make sure people see it coming way ahead of time, because the cost to that is low, but the cost to people feeling rug pulled is enormous.
Yeah,
and it's long-standing, right? The loss of reputation is easy. It's so easy to lose network effect and reputation, and it's so hard to gain it. It's exponential in both directions. So you really gotta be aware of that social layer.
Yeah, I just want to offer, like, this is not like from BCG or anything. This is my personal opinion, from my own observations, is that changing this setting either way is probably not going to be super apocalyptic either way. On the flip side, even if we change it to 2 megs, change it back to 2 megs today, some people might see that number and freak out. Wow, you're changing it back to 2 megs from 16 megs. But in actual usage, it probably would not amount to much. Like it wouldn't have that much of an effect. And it's due to a large part because most of the hash power is already setting their own thing anyway. So on one hand, if you take the effort to remove it, there will be some annoyance from miners and from people questioning, what the hell are these guys doing? Why are they prioritizing this? Emergent reasons, as said just now. So there will be some annoyance, but the sky would not fall. On the other hand, if you don't change that or even push it down lower, you will annoy a different set of people. So it is so at the end of the day, it is basically a question of who do you want to annoy, and whether doing the thing to doing that to make some people a little bit happier and some other people a bit more annoyed is worth the cost. And that cost lies in development and also some social costs. There will be a lot of bike shedding on something that up to this point most people don't even notice or talk about that much. So that's the main cost. But either way, the sky would not fall, and things would continue mostly normal. So,
Just to put it in context, I think probably everybody here agrees that in the medium or even maybe in the short term, at some point in the near future, the soft cap limits, there will be a default there, but probably the default will be set to whatever the ABLA says, whatever the algorithm says. It's just a matter of getting from here to there in a way that doesn't right, because we're discussing the better way to do things, not any way to do it, because there's lots of ways to do it, but a better way to do it. I wanted to add a specific thing here, because some people listening might hear like, oh, there's these costs and infrastructure operators have some costs. And it's like, what are you talking about? What does that really mean? So let me just give a really specific example just to make it a little bit more concrete. I'm running a node. I have the node with some running on the cloud with some, or, a rented server on with an X amount of memory and X amount of hard drive space and whatever, all that kind of stuff. And then this stress test comes along and starts pelting out 32 megabyte blocks, and or let's say the mempool test. This is a big one. The mempool test come through, like burst mempool, and it's like, okay, so it starts blowing up the mempool. Theoretically, no problem, but my particular node isn't set up for that, because generally the mempool is like this size, but all of a sudden it's gone up 10x or 50x in size due to this stress test, and my node died, right? Because in cloud setups or even just local setups, you have a certain amount of resources allocated, and it breaks, and it just crashes and goes into a crash loop, and you look at it and you're like, what the fuck is going on? My shit's broken, and it's not running anymore. My app stopped. And it's like, oh, okay, I see. It's trying to use too much memory. All right, so I need to increase the memory on this thing, and that's going to cost me. It's going to cost, change the cost of my thing from $200 a month to $300 a month, or something like that, right? It's a real cost.
More importantly, the developer cost, the person sitting there, the human.
Absolutely, yes, the human time of being like, hey, we have a problem. What's the problem? I don't know. Let me look into it. Okay, I looked into it. It looks like the problem is blah, 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 blah. Yeah, the human cost is even larger there, at least in the short term. So yeah, there are real costs. It's not a hypothetical thing involved here. There's human cost and engineering and lost time and ongoing operational costs.
This actually brings up a very interesting question, which is that for a lot of these situations, which happens once in a long while, the reason some of us feel the need to do unsolicited, basically what amounts to unsolicited testing on this service providers or businesses or whatever, is because we don't know how they will fare under these situations, and chances are those guys don't know how they themselves would fare under these situations either. And the reason they don't know how they would fare under this situation, like they don't necessarily need to provision resources for this, even if they know exactly what happens. But I would say that if they have very convenient ways to know what happens, they will want to find out. But a lot of times, you doing this kind of tests on themselves, whether on testnet or rectest or whatever, is also a human cost, and they might not want to invest that amount of cost. Like,
Absolutely,
a lot of times they want. What happens is that, okay, they try to sync on testnet. Okay, it syncs to testnet, good. It syncs to, and then they do it one step further. They sync to mainnet. It syncs to mainnet, good, and then they leave it at that because that's the cheapest and easiest way. It would be really nice if there are very cheap and convenient tools for them to simulate this kind of stressful situations whenever they want, so that they know exactly what happens. But unfortunately, we don't currently have such tools. So what instead happens is that once in a long, long while, something bad happens, and then they find out involuntarily. Yeah, it will be really nice if such tools exist so that they can find out whenever they want.
And as Jeremy said at the very beginning, if we just have it organized so that you can find it and be like, hey, we're kind of worried about memory usage. It's like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. Here's the results over here. If you have that well organized, then they get that research for free. And then they have their questions answered. And probably they're very happy that all this stuff appears. And then when that's there, they'll be a lot more willing when somebody contacts them, hey, we're looking at doing some experiments. They're like, sure, it's been useful for me. I'm happy to participate.
Yes, and as much as it pains me to say so, like currently, despite our focus on scaling Bitcoin, we are severely lacking in easily accessible tools in this regard, and this is a great place for people to jump in and volunteer, fund, seek funding, or whatever.
And there's a thing, for example, that Matrix made, a guy called Matrix, I don't know, a user called Matrix made, called Corgi, right? Where he does, similar to what Jonathan was saying earlier that BU had done, where it spins up a virtual network, to better represent realistic situation. Obviously not perfectly, but to somewhat better represent, real latencies and so forth in different regions and all of that kind of thing. So we've gone quite a long time here. Let me try to not wrap up necessarily, but present a concrete suggestion to anybody who's interested in this topic and wants to do things in a good way. So I'm going to present this, and then you guys can agree or disagree with it, or we can end with that, or whatever it goes. So let me present that. The first is to acknowledge several things. One is that this is a permissionless network. You can do what you want to do. Nobody can really stop you, except to the degree that miners are like, screw this, and it's so bad that collectively they decide not to engage with whatever you're doing. So that's one thing. Acknowledge that nobody is stopping you, right? So there's nobody like grabbing you by the neck and stopping you from doing what you're doing. That's not the case. The second is to acknowledge on the flip side that everything you do has an impact, has costs. It has benefits, of course, or else you wouldn't be doing it probably, unless you're an attacker. But also acknowledge that everything you do may have costs, especially when done on mainnet, right? So just to acknowledge that there are benefits, yes, and there are costs, yes. And so then the specific thing to approach the kind of process would be first, qualify and quantify to whatever degree you can do what it is you want to learn. What are you actually trying to accomplish? Try as best as you can to qualify it. This is kind of what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, why it's important, and quantify, these are the limits that I expect. These are the limits that I expect to see. This is what I expect to happen. This is like a high school level science experiment setup. It's very easy to find guidelines for doing this kind of thing. So try to make it, to some degree scientific. And I think over time, it'll become more and more literally scientific. So please do that. Quantify and qualify what it is you want to learn ahead of time. The second step is learn what you can from testnet. And yes, there's a cost to it. Absolutely. As Uname just said, nothing's free. Doing this stuff on testnet has a cost for you too. But if you're looking at this from trying to do things in a better way, I think it's easy to understand that taking the costs on yourself in the first step is a good, reasonable thing to do before you socialize and blast these costs out to all infrastructure operators and app operators and so forth. So as much as you can, learn what you can in the context of your qualified and quantified experiment on testnet. And of course, you won't be able to learn everything, but you learn what you can. The third step is take those things that you did learn from testnet, which, they may be loose boundaries or they may be tight boundaries, depending on what you're testing, and communicate those to the ecosystem in reports, in articles, in direct communication. Like if it looks like, hey, this is going to be a problem for pools, or this is going to be a problem for indexers, or this is going to be a problem for mempool explorers, or whatever it is, communicate with those parties to some degree and publish that as well, right? So do the upfront legwork as you can, as your costs allow. And it may be very minimal, but to some degree, try to do what you can ahead of time, figure things out and communicate those and find out why those things are happening or what those limits might be, why those limits are there, etc. And then after you've done that to some degree, then you can say, hey, look, now we're going to do this on testnet in a reasonable way that we actively try not to break things. We're not trying to break things.
Right?
On mainnet, yes. Don't intend to break things. I think that's a good guideline to say. Don't intend to break things. Try to communicate ahead of time and do experiments that don't break things. And if you do things in a reasonable way that you think won't break things, and I think, Alex, you have said several times that you didn't try to break things, which is great. That's this point. Then it's much easier to communicate on the social layer, like, right? Okay, we expected not to break something, but something did break. We're sorry. Let's communicate about it and find out what happened and try to figure it out, right? But that's a different social starting point than, hey, we set out to break things and your shit sucked, sucker, whatever. You know what I mean? There's a difference on which side of that line you're coming from. So try to be on the side of, we tried not to break things while still trying to learn something. And then iterate. Start small. Don't do this as a gigantic project from the outset, right? Start small. Do something small. Just focus on one pool or one purpose and learn from there. So yeah, that's the simple process. Does that sound like something reasonable? Any modifications or pushback or changes or?
Yeah, generally,
Alex,
generally when trying to run any test on any network anywhere, trying to get as much data and as sophisticated of a piece of data as you can from it is always preferable. That historically has been the weakness of many such initiatives. Like, okay, we go there, we did a test, and then we maybe learn a little bit of things, and then we all go home. That's not good enough. Try to get the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, I'll echo that. There was a stress test back in the day, and people were asked to set their nodes into debug mode before, and we collected a bunch of data. And after the stress test was completed and we looked at the data, some people said that, oh, this is bad. It would be so much better if more people had collected this data, like properly had configured and collected those logs. Running the stress test, there's a lot we can learn under those conditions, but only if people are ready to actually gather and store the data.
Jeremy, what did you think about that like simple set of guidelines?
Yeah, I think it makes sense as a framework. I would add definitely, and sort of touching on what Jonathan was just saying as well too, you really want to be able to document as much of this stuff as possible, because undoubtedly we're going to get into a situation where then you have, different people cropping up all over the place. I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do that, and it'll be like, well, we've already done that, or we did something similar, or blah, blah, blah. And you just got to prevent the same question being rehashed 50 times. And then for the people that do have something different or want to do something regardless, in any case, then you need to at least get them on the right foot with, okay, here's the background research and reading and things that you need to start with before you embark onto all this. So I think that's good as a theoretical framework, and I don't know if we're going to have time for it today, but maybe as a follow-up one, then we should probably continue on with. So in this specific case that Alec, we haven't really touched on, except a little bit the ABLA activation. We talked about that a little bit, and also the soft cap, but some of the other stuff we didn't even really get to, let alone what are the actual next steps as to, okay, let's do it following that process. We've talked about the costs and benefits. So what can we do to get this going on testnet, and collecting data and all that would be the next thing. So I think that might be for another day, though. Maybe today we've got as far as we're going to get.
Yeah, we've gone pretty long. I've been really happy with what we covered. Alex, what did you think about that kind of top level framework?
Generally, no, I think I agree with that completely as high level, top level. Yeah, I agree with Jeremy said too. I think, I think this, I fully agree top level. I would love to have a follow up at some point to better figure out, okay, now what are the more specifics for the next steps. But the one question I would like to pose, because I'm honestly not actually sure of the answer now, is just at a high level, and I know this has basically gone on for longer than usual, so this will be my last one. I'll shut up after this. Is there any benefit to ever having an unannounced test? And I say this because when you pre-announce some kind of test happening, people can prepare for it and everything else. But is there ever a benefit? And maybe the costs completely outweigh the benefits anyways, but is there a foreseeable case where doing an unannounced test might make sense because you'll be able to test things that you wouldn't otherwise see?
Yeah, I'll argue that yes, there are, and there's probably multiple benefits to it. But let me just take the one that is the closest and quickest I could find. So imagine that you're going through this process otherwise. You're checking things on testnet. You're setting up specific testnets to test latency and network and geographic conditions and whatnot. And you're talking with miners, and you're doing all the possible legwork you can to get to a point where you can say, hey, this shit's solid. It's gonna be super great. And at that point, running an unannounced test on mainnet, because you have done all the legwork, you can quantify and say, yeah, the cost is low enough that there won't be a problem. And then afterwards, you can say, yeah, look, everybody, about that confident attitude, can we actually scale? Yeah, we did scale. Here's the proof. There is benefit to doing that unannounced, because no one can then go and point and say that, hey, this is fabricated or whatever. You can just point to the real data on the real blockchain. But you really, really got to make sure that it's going to work out and it's not going to cause a problem. You don't see banksters running, let's try stress testing Visa on the public mainnet. It doesn't happen. They don't do that, and they don't do it for a reason.
Yeah, very well said. It's the social layer thing, right? This is expectations and reputation. If you have a reputation that, hey, we set everybody up for success, and then something went wrong, well, shit, that's understandable. That kind of thing happens. But if you more or less set everybody up for failure to some degree, and then everybody fails, that never feels good. The school of hard knocks can teach you a lot, but fuck, it sucks along the way. So, yeah, like Jonathan said.
Yeah, fully agree. Makes perfect sense. Definitely agree there.
And I also want to acknowledge, and in closing, that all this stuff that I said, or this kind of guideline or outline, is not cheap. And I think that's a fair point to just accept, that if you want to do things well, it's not necessarily cheap. Everything's like that. If you want to do something that builds reputation, that builds communication, that learns as much as we can, that achieves as much as we can, that takes various talent, right? It takes not only developers, but it takes, kind of a management of what it is you're going to do. It takes good communication. It takes good time management and so forth. It's not cheap to do those things. It costs time and effort and skill and money. So that's something to acknowledge, that doing these things well has some cost associated to it as well. I think what we're getting at here, though, is that for some reasonable investment, you're going to get a much larger gain with much less cost. And that's what I think overall turns into the better way of doing things. Some cost up front, taken on, and then you're going to get more gains on the backside once you go with it. All right, so yeah, let's wrap up here. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate you guys pushing this and making sure that this conversation happens. And then, as Jeremy said, it needs to turn into something real, something that people can grab onto. And we don't have anybody who has agreed to do those things, but maybe we can talk on the out in the real world and figure out who can take ownership of these things. All right. Before we wrap up, anything somebody wants to say, anything that you have been holding on to, wanting to get across before we wrap up?
I just want to say, this is not limited to stress testing or application scaling concerns or whatnot. We generally have way too few people doing technical research, like in general. Please, people, join the effort, join the army, raise flip starters if you're confident and things like that. We generally need a lot more technical research in all aspects.
And a beautiful thing about the decentralized ecosystem that we have is if you reach out and you just say, hey, I need help setting this up in a, at least a pseudoscientific way, there's actually more scientists and people with that experience than you would expect in the BCH ecosystem. There's quite a few of them. So just ask and see if you can get somebody to help you setting things up. And if all else fails, use what is it, Cunningham's Law? Present a really terrible plan, and suddenly everybody will jump in and tell you how to make it better.
Are we going to take any questions? Looks like we might have one question from the audience.
Yeah,
do we have time for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't see any hands or.
Yeah, I don't know if you can put a hand up if you're not a speaker.
We had one there from Web3 Dopamine, who is now.
No, I'm sorry, I missed it. Sorry, I was busy taking notes. And
here we go.
Oh, he's back. Yeah, he's the guy that's doing Tech City, by the way, the Tech Street.
Oh, great. Okay,
he's running the Flip Starter, has cash token, is adding cash tokens.
Let me invite him real quick. Just a moment. Web3 Dopamine. Web3 Dopamine. Great name.
I know, love it.
It's perfect. All right, I've invited Web3. Can you give us a little thumbs up if you're intending to ask a question here or have something to say? Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure he's listening.
Maybe not.
Now. I've given him.
I tried to approve it, but it's not. This is where we run into the Twitter space.
Yeah, I've invited him.
Right.
Oh, he's there. I've given him an invite.
Is he?
Yeah, I gave him an invite to talk. That'd be great to hear from him.
Right.
Wait, did he get up? I think he got up.
Did he?
No.
I don't see him. Web3, if you want, you can always just shoot me a message on our Discord and I can ask it for you, but would prefer to have you as speaker.
So he's working on the TX Street. What's the name of the URL?
So it's txcity.io. It's the only tech street that actually has BCH still. And I've been working with him. We've been going back and forth for a while. I contacted him when he was the first fork of Tax Street when they went.
Hello.
decided to
Yeah,
shut
hi
down.
guys.
Hey,
Hi. So yeah, I'm new to this community, so hi to everyone, and forgive me if I'm not aware of all the details. So currently I'm running TXCT, which has I'll just introduce what I'm doing in the space right now. So I'm running TXCT, which have 6 teams, and BCH is one of those. And BCH community has been really supportive, to be honest, since the beginning. So yeah, and currently, so I've raised a Flip Starter campaign as well to add more features and make sure the mempool works exactly as expected. So yeah, and just an intro for now. And I was listening to the whole conversation. I didn't listen to the entire conversation though, but TXCT is definitely open to even add testnet for better visualization and other stuff if you guys would like that as well.
fantastic! Yeah, reply to the Twitter thread with your Flip Starter so that it'll get some
Sure.
visibility. Would be happy to see
Oh,
that.
sure. I'll share it right now.
Fantastic and very nice name.
He's asking for 3 BCH, which I think is very doable for all of us. I'll personally fund the entire thing if needed.
That may be possible. 3 BCH may be possible. I don't know, but maybe.
So
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's
great.
fantastic to have a good TX City, TX Street working for BCH again. That'll be good stuff.
It's frankly the only one that works today, and he's working on his Flipstar talks about adding cash tokens support, so we will to see what cash token someone issued or what transaction happened, which would be really, really, really cool.
That's awesome. Who's
so,
running
yeah.
the infrastructure for that? Because I know the TX Street
Yes.
infrastructure is pretty heavy. Oh wow, Web Dopamine, you're running it. Wow, okay, that's a pretty big deal. And I know for doing cash tokens, it's most reasonable to add that stuff on the back end instead of on the front end. So yeah, it's non-trivial stuff to add that in. Okay. Yeah, it's good to
Yep.
talk with you, Web Dopamine, and thanks for coming up. Any other questions before we wrap up?
No questions from my side.
Okay. All right. Yeah, as usual, a pretty quiet audience on the General Bull spaces. So thank you, Jeremy, again for pushing this conversation to happen, and Alex for investing your own resources and being a stakeholder and trying to make things happen, make positive things happen. I really appreciate it, and I hope this will go in an even better direction.
Absolutely. Thanks
Yeah,
for hosting
thank you.
the space.
I think it's really good. It's great progress for BCH. If we can get a bit more of this kind of stuff going and documented, it's just, that's how we improve, and that's how we're going to show the rest of the world, the rest of the market, that BCH is not to be messed around with. If they show up and we're serious, it starts with taking ourselves seriously and doing the work ahead of time. So I'm really glad to see it.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been great to talk with you. I also think this was super productive, and I look forward to we'll pull some shorts out of this. And also, as I was saying, there's some to-dos to be taken care of here. Maybe we can discuss those offline. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you for listening, for joining Web Dopamine. And we will talk with you next time. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys.